join me in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you that we can begin our week in worship to you, and out of that worship, we can serve you. We thank you for the opportunity we have tonight to answer questions, to share the feedback we received from our first budget town hall meeting. We ask, Heavenly Father, that your Spirit be present tonight. We pray for wisdom and clarity of thought. We ask, too, that you bless us as we begin a new season. We thank you for the seasons that you bless us with, and we thank you for the greening grass and the budding trees. It is certainly a reminder of your covenant faithfulness to your people. We ask that you bless our time together tonight. We pray all these things in Christ's name. Amen. I'd like to thank you for coming tonight. We're going to begin with a presentation where we're going to kind of walk through. I think it's about 14 or 15 high-level questions that came out of the feedback survey, and then we're going to give you some time to ask questions as well. So I'll begin. The first question, I'm going to take the first 4 slides here, is will voucher families be required to fill out all the forms through the tuition assistance program? The answer to that question is no. All voucher eligible families are going to continue to work with Paulette on any voucher related issues. Families qualifying for the vouchers who need additional assistance beyond the voucher, we would encourage them to consider applying through the fax portal as well. The next question is actually 2 questions because I'm not sure the origins of this question, and it is, will the endowment be built into tuition? So there's 2 ways I take this question. The first way I take the question is, will we be building the endowment using tuition dollars, right? If that's the question, the answer to that would be no. While some Christian schools have practiced using tuition assistance or using tuition dollars, and they actually tithe their tuition dollars to an endowment fund, we're currently not doing that and do not plan on building our endowment in that matter. Rather, we're going to be seeking the creation of a separate 501c3 foundation to oversee Crown Point Christian Schools endowment. If the question is, will the endowment be used as an income line item in the budget to reduce the cost of tuition for everyone, that depends. But right now, but probably not right now and not in the near future. Our endowment fund last month, we get a report monthly. We have about $170,000 in our endowment. We have not taken a draw on our endowment, and our desire is to build up those funds in order to supplement needs-based assistance. One of the questions that was asked or mentioned to us in the feedback is, what happens if the voucher goes away? And we realize that in order to if the voucher were to go away, we need to have built up our endowment fund. So one of the things that's going to be in the strategic roadmap is building up that endowment so that if the voucher were to go away, that we have a plan to address that. We also have never taken a draw on that endowment, and right now there's no plans in the near future to take a draw on that endowment, but to rather continue to build it. Next question is, what are the plans for tuition levels over the next 5 years? So the administrative leadership team, I think in November, we began the process of operationalizing the strategic roadmap. We really focus on 2 key resources, obviously time and money. So a draft of an actualized strategic plan is going to go to the board, and once that plan's approved by the board, our plan is to have a town hall meeting that will share all facets of the strategic roadmap. That process is taking longer than we anticipated, but when complete, we will account for all tuition increases for the next 5 years. Essentially, if it's not in the strategic roadmap, we would need to reallocate funds and make changes to the plan to fit the proposed changes being offered to us. It's also important to note that we haven't experienced inflationary levels in many years. As we build the strategic roadmap, there's been conversations about what do you do with fixed costs, right? So we're building the strategic roadmap with a presumption of normal levels of inflation, and understand that we may need to pivot from them normal levels if these levels of inflation continue. We obviously would also pivot if there would be a downturn, and we would have to reduce those tuition levels and reduce some of those expectations. A sister Christian school, someone I'm connected with, is in the 5th year of their strategic roadmap, and they've hit those tuition numbers for 4 years. And with inflation numbers where they're at this year, they had a 3% tuition increase scheduled for this year and had to increase to a 5% tuition level to adjust salaries for staff because of the increase in inflation. So we're committed to communicating the Crown Point Christian School Board any of those changes to our society and the reasons for those changes. Finally, something is a part of this. This year was a very unique budget year as the board committed to transitioning away from an affordable school model to an accessible school model. This has obviously created a higher than normal increase in tuition, and we understand that our association cannot sustain levels of tuition increases like this annually. So our desire is that the 5-year strategic roadmap, when that rolls out, that we will have normalized tuition increases throughout that plan. Just an update to that, we finished what would be considered our first draft of the financial modeling on Friday, and we've looked at that strategic modeling. I can't speak to it today because I honestly haven't even shared it with a board member yet, but we made some really good progress on that in the past week. So next question is, there seems to be a desire by the board to address teacher compensation and properly budget for depreciation. Does this mean we can expect larger tuition increases in the future too? My answer to that is you are correct. The board is committed to properly budgeting for depreciation and aligning our compensation schedules to Christian schools in a similar market with similar enrollments and programs. We're building up funds to properly fund for depreciation. So in 5 years, this year's budget, 1.6% of our budget is going for depreciation expenses. In 5 years, that number will reach, we're hoping it'll reach between 5 and 6%. Right now, we think it's going to be about 5.2, 5.3%. The 2022-23 budget does make a larger than normal increase in teacher salaries. But what I can tell you is, in what we're seeing in the strategic financial modeling, is we're not going to see levels of tuition like this in the next 5 years. So that's what we've been seeing. So I think I turn it over to you for the next set of slides. So.
Well, I do know that the first slide that's going to come up that I have the responsibility for is how do we tie performance into compensation? And that's always a complicated issue that we have seen not only here at Crown Point Christian School, but at other schools as well. Something that we really wanted to do with the compensation schedule was standardize the compensation schedule, also to clarify that compensation schedule. Are these only yours? There we go, perfect. Thank you, Mr. T. Grotenhuis. I got it. We're good. The other thing that we wanted to do was incentivize the comp schedule with a I guess, a growth, right? So the more you climb, the higher on the compensation ladder you're going to grow. And the way that we do that is we provide funds for professional development of teachers, certifications, licensing, etc., higher education, so that our teachers have the incentive to continue to grow in their learning and their education and their growth as teachers to further enrich and enhance the learning experience of our students. We do not currently have a pay-for-performance style of compensation schedule, but I would envision us having some form of that in the future. Our senior leadership team, the middle school principal, and the elementary school principal are working with Mr. de Grotenhuis to come up with an evaluation that is also standardized and allows us to better measure the quality and the performance of our faculty within the classroom. As I mentioned also, we are increasing the availability of financial assistance to teachers who are pursuing Indiana teacher licensure, advanced degrees, and coursework. And again, that's a trickle-down model where if we enhance their learning, their wisdom, their skill set, that will translate well into the offering and the educational experience of our children in the classroom. All right. All right, I did it. Should I introduce myself? No, I won't. Okay, what multi-child tuition discounts are being offered to families? And really, that was presented in the last slide deck that we had previously at our prior meeting. You can read it there. A $400 reduction for the fourth child's tuition, an $800 reduction in the fifth child's tuition. We will maintain a support relationship with Second Life, but we are changing that from an opt-out model to an opt-in model. Where currently we have an opt-out model, if you would not like to take advantage of that partnership, you can opt out, and those funds would then go into the endowment, and we would utilize that for needs-based financial assistance. We are shifting that from an opt-out to an opt-in. So if you would like to take advantage of that partnership, you can opt into that program, and the Second Life funds will still be available for you and financially assist in your tuition payments. The funds, as we mentioned, the funds from families who do not opt into the Second Life credit will be used for needs-based assistance going into our endowment and then coming out toward our needs-based families. And we're going to redirect the non-needs-based tuition out to those families that have a need or have shown a need for financial assistance in tuition payments. Oh yeah, this is a fun one. So when we talk about volunteer hours, how are we going to utilize those going forward, and will they still be implemented? Oh boy. And the answer to that is yes. We are still going to utilize service hours. The reason that we're going to utilize the service hours is because a lot of that is volunteer work from our families and our parents that offset a lot of expenses that we don't have to then outsource to others to accomplish. Some of those common items are really student-facing or forward-facing toward our kids. So if we have hot lunch people that come in and assist, we have those that organize the auction, we have Pi Day, we have Christmas parties, Grandparents' Day, and also service at Second Life. All of that we would consider as student-facing. So the volunteer hours, the requirement is 36 hours. The deadline for that to meet those 36 hours is May 1st. Families that don't meet those 36 hours by May 1st are then April 30? Oh yeah, because that messes you up, right? April 30. It says May 1st, but I'll go with April 30. Perfect. Thanks, Christy. Make sure you get your hours in April 30th. On May 1st, we will charge a $15 fee for each credit hour that you're short, or for each service hour that you're short. There is a line item in the budget for 22-23 that includes a 500-hour deficiency at $15 an hour, and that accounts for about $7,500. Did I go back twice? Oh, my word. Will a more detailed categorized budget be shared with the association? Well, it's about that time of year where we get ready for the association meeting, the annual association meeting, and that meeting is scheduled this year for April 20th at 7 p.m. We will circulate an agenda not later than April 6th, 2022, which is 2 weeks ahead of that association meeting. With that packet of information, that packet of information will include the agenda. It would also have a profile of each candidate that is up for election as a nominee to the Board of Trustees. It will also include a more detailed summary of the 2022-2023 CPCS proposed budget, and it will also include a detailed outlook as how the 21-22 budget fits with actual numbers. So I guess the short answer to that is yes, and it's going to be in line with what we have previously presented to our association ahead of the meeting. And now I pass it over to Joe Lenahan.
I'm Joe Lenahan. Good evening. So the first question that I am tackling is what is included in the tuition assistance algorithm. So the algorithm seeks to assess, so the way FACTS set this up is it seeks to assess for those that apply what the family's contribution towards tuition would be. And so it does that by looking at their income, assets, and expenses. So basically it looks, and it's all self-reported, so the income less what their core expenses are, and the contribution would then be a percentage of that. And it's on a scaled basis. And then it also looks at liquid assets and determines a contribution as a percentage of that as well. So, did I switch? So it says FACTS tuition expense algorithm. So these are just a few examples of what the costs are. I think some of this was in the last presentation. But again, it's all self-reported. I mean, we could put a formula up here. It would be about 25 if-then statements if you were using Excel. I'm sure the head of school would be willing to go through it with anyone that wants to look at it. But I think it was explained last time. So each of the core expenses has like a cap on it. I think at the last meeting I couldn't make, David mentioned that they sort of have some controls in place for that so that someone can't over-report their expenses or something like that. But in any event, it identifies several expenses. These are some of them. And so you report that in there. And that's reduced from your income. And then, as I said, there's sort of a scaled approach. Income above and beyond that difference for a portion of it is at a certain percent, and then a portion above that at another percent. If I'm not making any sense, see David some other time. But in any event, it's a pretty good system. We've taken a close look at it. I mentioned there was caps in there as well. So, yeah, I think there's going to be a Q&A time. I mean, I'll keep moving. So what is the current projected student count? Okay, so this school continues to see enrollment growth, a lot of interest. So for example, for the current school year that we're in, we budgeted 749 students, and we started the year with 777 students. So we saw more interest than what we had budgeted for. And of course, this kind of thing adds revenue, but it also it adds costs. So when that happens, the administration, the board, the finance committee, we take a look at it, we figure out what kind of things we're going to need, and so we did that coming into this year. In January, and I'll mention a little bit more later about the process for the budget, but in January we put together a proposed budget, and at that time we estimated 825 students in the budget. And between January and now, we are now anticipating 855 students, so that interest continues to grow. And I'll just say, David and his team have sort of put a, I guess you would call it a pause. I don't know what words you would want me to use, but they're basically taking people in as a wait pool now. So they've essentially set the website up so that the people's contact information comes in, and David and his team can assess this on an ongoing basis because, you know, you just can't take in unlimited amounts of kids. We'd love to, but you have to sort of assess. So that's where we stand today. What is the plan for the next 5 to 10 years being addressed by the capital appreciation budget? I noticed during David's presentation he covered a little of this, so I apologize in advance, but this building itself and everything in it will need to be replaced at some point. And so the building, of course, was new 12 or 14 years ago, and now it's starting to get to an age where we need to start setting aside funds to replace these kinds of things. So that's one of the focuses of this. We've also made significant investments in technology, and these items will need to be replaced in time as well. So we continue to add computers for lower and lower grades. These are great things for our kids, but then you need to start thinking about when are we going to replace these things. So that's kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about a depreciation or capital replacement. So as David noted, best practice for a budget is to be in the range of 5.5% for this, and the budget that we're proposing right now has 1.6%. So over time, our plan is to continue to set aside more and more of the regular budget funds for these types of items. And it's something that we can watch. So we can put together plans in the strategic roadmap, and we are. The strategic roadmap has these things identified, and then we can assess it on a year-by-year basis. Do we need more? Do we need less? And we will do that. What analysis was done to determine the estimated impact changes to this budget would have on CPCS families? So this was a question that we got. It's a very, very good question. We actually talked about surveying the families and actually going to individual families, and we did decide no on that. We believe that some of the advice that we got using a third party is the right way to go, and that's the way we're going, and we've talked about this with facts a little bit. So I will say that we think we have a pretty good idea of where many of our families are at, and the reason is because we know families, we know which families and how many are utilizing the voucher. We know that from past years, and then we know the changes that were made to the voucher this year, and we've already seen who's applying to that. So that gives us a pretty good idea. Also, I would just say that financial aid has been pretty publicly known for at least a couple years here. We started really putting it out there to the community starting around COVID, that we had the ability for families to seek help if they need it. And so because of that 2-year history, we kind of know about how many families needed financial aid in those conditions, and then we can sort of extrapolate a little bit. But of course, we're gonna see as we move forward and with this fax system what changes there might be to that. So as I mentioned, the decision was made to go with fax for assessing the need, and I kind of talked about that a little bit. Of course, the school is always going to be willing to meet with families one-on-one, especially if there's a unique need. So if someone goes through the fax process and they get done and they're unsatisfied with it for any reason, it's not as though we can't meet with them. We would always do that, and we will do that. We anticipate meeting with families who might say, hey, I have this unique situation that I don't think this system is capturing or something like that. We're all ears. And the good news is God has really blessed us with the resources to be able to help families. So we have resources, and we believe we will continue to have resources to help families in that way. This is my final slide. It says, it appears that changes to the voucher program has given the board extra liberties to raise tuition. What process was used to develop the budget? So just to be clear, we did not consider the voucher when we were assessing the expense side of the budget. So the way, I'm just going to say the existence of the voucher did play a role, I want to say, in our consideration for the 4th and 5th kids being at no charge. But when we sat down to look at what is the expense side of the budget, the voucher was not a consideration for that. So what is the process for the budget? This year, the process we followed was the head of school and his team put together a draft of a budget. I believe they started in December? No, September, okay. And so the Finance Committee had several meetings. I'm on the Finance Committee, so we had several meetings along the way. And those meetings are opportunities for us to challenge their assumptions. It's a very collaborative and it's a good process, but we're able to say, I don't know about that. Or did you think about this? You might want to put this in there. I remember 2 years ago we had this. So it's a very open, collaborative process. And we rework the numbers. We come back again the next month. And then the school board is presented with the budget by the administration and the Finance Committee. And the school board approves bringing it to the association for approval. And I'm sorry, but I just have to say, it is a tremendous amount of work. And Christy and David owe a debt of gratitude. It's a lot of work. So I think that is my last slide. And I think John's taking the last one.
The last slide tonight, and we're not taking up too much of your time, but then we'll open it up to questions after this slide. One of the themed questions was, will Spanish immersion be included in the all-in cost of tuition? And the short answer to that is yes. The way that this budget was developed as an all-in style of tuition payment is we are a school with many programs with many offerings. Each dollar that comes into the school is utilized and is earmarked for those programs and for those offerings. So whether your child is in choir or not, whether your child is in band or not, whether your child is participating in any of the athletic programs that we offer here at Crown Point Christian School, whether they are utilizing student services either on the needs side or on the Excel side, whether they have a reading specialist, whether they utilize the counselor, whether they come and visit the school nurse. These are all programs and offerings that Crown Point Christian provides to all of its student base. And the only program that really had an a la carte style of premium on it was Spanish Immersion or dual language. And so we are subsuming that into the overall cost of tuition, and it'll be an all-in cost. So no more costs for field trips, no more upfront costs or additional costs throughout the school year. It's all in one tuition price point for all of the offerings, all the programs that we have at Crown Point Christian School. So I think that answers a lot of the questions that came in. We tried to create a theme style of response to the questions that did come in, and now we'll open up for questions from those that are present here tonight. The way that will work is I'll obviously ask, you guys will state your question, I will repeat the question, and then either myself, David, or Joe will go ahead and answer those questions. So who wants to be first? It seems that the question is, are there families at the school that would otherwise qualify for the voucher system, but for whatever reason the family is not taking advantage of that opportunity for whatever reason? And is the school prepared to, or have they offered to assist that family in either obtaining those voucher funds or assisting them financially in another way? Correct? Or maybe they are not, right, so maybe they're not educated on whether or not it's available to them, or there's a problem with the actual process of applying. I will answer that, and if I miss anything, Joe and David can fill in. I'm not aware of any family in that situation. If they are out there, they haven't come to us for that. We have tried to do a better job of communicating that availability and that opportunity to our association at large, and our hope is that they would understand that that is available and that they would apply. The way that the process that they would go through to apply is to contact the office, and Paulette and her team would guide them through that process. And so we do have a good team in place that assists families in applying for those voucher programs. Yeah.
So any family who needs access to the voucher can still apply for it for an SGO scholarship until April 22. We pushed really hard at the beginning of the school year, letting families know that things have changed. I'll repeat what I said at the last meeting. A family of 5 making $180,000 a year is eligible for a voucher that's around $5,700. It depends what school district you're in. If you're in Gary School District, it's $7,700. Anyway, as a part of the application for FACS, we tell families we will not consider, if you're voucher eligible, we will help them through that year of SGO. But after that, the expectation is that they've gone through the voucher process before we will provide assistance. Great question.
So the question is and we're shifting a month on the budget. So we are giving teachers compensation for that month, that gap month, which will be basically a double pay for a month. With the increase in teacher comp or faculty comp, what does that look like numbers-wise? Joe, do you want to take that question?
Yeah, the answer is I don't know off the top of my head, but that's a great question, and I'm writing it down. I don't know off the top of my head what those two together are, but we can get that information to you. Maybe David does.
So teachers are contracted 190 days, right? So they're contracted 190 days. Their contract starts on September 1. So it's essentially whatever 1/12 of their contract is. That's the percentage. So they're getting paid a month early for their 2020-2021 contract, which means in the rear they won't get that pay. Does that make sense? So they're just getting paid a month early for that contract, but that's 1/112 plus their pay increase for this year. Does that make sense? I can't tell you what the percent is. On the base, it's a pretty substantial increase. We're looking at 9.7% on the base, and then it's like 3% on the rest of it. So I would say for most of our teachers, they're going to see about a 7% raise plus that month they're getting a month ahead of time.
Yeah, so the question is, we have a line item for financial assistance incentivizing teachers to grow in education, professional development, right? But also to gain licensure, and we need some clarification on what that means, what that term actually means. So, do you want to answer that question? I saw you stand up, so.
So CSI requires that you are licensed or working to, or can demonstrate a plan to work towards licensure. We have several teachers at our school. I have a handful of teachers at our school who are licensed in another state, but they haven't gotten their Indiana licensure yet. So the plan is to work with them on a plan to get properly certified in the state of Indiana. And we also have teachers who are certified teachers but not in their content area. Does that make sense? So they might be a special ed teacher who might be an L-Ed. So we want to work with them to get the training for the position in which we hired them for.
So the question from Mike is, thank you for serving on the board, by the way. It's great stuff. The question is, years ago when Mike served on the board here, we had an allocation, maybe not titled depreciation, but certainly a set aside for facilities, maintenance, et cetera, of about, you said 50 to 80? Something. Okay. Yeah. Right. And Joe, do you want to handle this question? I feel like I'm not answering any, but.
I'm a little embarrassed. I didn't bring the last balance sheet in that with, but what you're saying is absolutely right. So we've had to use some of those funds too. So you're right. Different amounts every year are put away, and every year you're trying to balance with how much are we going to raise tuition, and what kind of expenses do we have. So we have what we call a building reserve fund, and we do put some money away into that, and that's there. But we feel that it needs to be increased. And again, the building component of it is part of it. But we also have a lot of technology and things like that are starting to get, so this building is what, 14 years old, and so we feel like it just needs to be a little bit more. And we're just trying to be super transparent with the way we're structuring that. Do you have I found it right here, yeah. So the current balance is $229,549 in the building reserve fund.
So last year, I can only speak to last year because I developed this year's budget. So last year's budget, when I think at the association meeting this was mentioned, when we added in the admins in order to balance the budget, we had EANS funds coming in. The federal government gave schools EANS money. What does EANS stand for? Anybody? Educational Assistance for Non-Public Schools. So we received several $100,000 in EANS funds. Every non-public school in the state received that. And we utilized those funds for our technology expense. So when they wrote last year's budget, instead of keeping the line item for technology depreciation for technology replacement, they brought it way down. And then I would say we had, I think there's $40,000 in this year's budget for building and grounds. So what we did, so there was a total of $60,000 in last year's budget to repair, for technology and building repair and replacement. A total of 60. This coming year's budget will have $110,000 in it as we begin to replace, as we begin to put that back in to budget properly for capital repair replacement of building and technology things.
So the question is, how much of the reserve fund was utilized to build out the 4-classroom addition? Joe, do you want to answer that question? So none of it was used and none has been used in the past. David?
In the motion that was passed, I wasn't here, but a year ago, they said that we could utilize a money market, and I think that's what you're referring to. There is a money market set aside for a building project, and right now that has not been utilized. We could utilize that if we wanted to. That money market was at I think it was 1.4 million is what that money market's at, designated for a building project.
So the question is, when we talk about endowment, there used to be, Dave is also a prior board member, so it used to be something called a foundation. Is that something different than an endowment? And the answer to that is, we have an account with the Barnabas Foundation, which is an account that which is a third-party administrator of foundation style of accounts. What we are planning to do is create a formal endowment for Crown Point Christian School, which would be its own foundation, so a standalone foundation with its own board of directors. We've seen other schools do this in our area, and it's something that we need to do. And the reason that we need to do that is because we need to be prepared as best as we can for when the day comes, if it does come, that the voucher program is not something that we would be willing to participate in any longer, but still provide that financial assistance to our families. Because something that's really important for us as a board, and something that our school has always stood for, is we should never turn families away who desire Christian education because of finances. That's not the type of school that we want to become, and that's not where we want to go. So what we are in the process of doing is creating an endowment which would stand on its own, be its own foundation, have its own board of directors, and that will incentivize more end-of-life giving, estate planning style of funding for this endowment / foundation program. But to answer your question, it does not exist right now. It's simply a Barnabas Foundation account that we can contribute funds toward, but we're working toward having a standalone foundation that would enable us to prepare for that future event. So the question regarding the partnership with Second Life is, Second Life, looking back, was formed for the purpose of being a resource for all students at Crown Point Christian School, all families at Crown Point Christian School. And we feel that with the opt-in procedure, as a change from the opt-out that we initiated back, I believe it was 2020, in March of 2020, that kind of looks not in keeping with the startup of Second Life. Is that accurate? Is that okay? And then you asked what the thought process was of how we came up with that system. Yeah. Okay. I see what you're saying. Right. Sure. So we're not asking you not to opt in any longer. If you'd like to opt in, there's no shame in opting in. You can still opt in, and it's still available for all. So it's, I mean, you shouldn't, if that's the true feeling, then opt in, by all means, opt in. But what we wanted to get toward, and this is in keeping with the board at Second Life, who has had a shift of mentality as well since its conception, of being more of a needs-based style of partnership with Crown Point Christian School. And for us to incentivize families to be more mindful of needs-based families within our association, we shifted toward an opt-in philosophy rather than an opt-out philosophy. And that just makes it a conscious decision for families to say, this is where we are, this is what we need. If you enjoy the charitable donation, which I do as well, trust me, I do as well, then opt in. There is no shame in opting in whatsoever. But you have to go through that extra step of actually opting in. If you forget, then you're out. If you opt out, or if you opt in, you're in, and that's fine. And we don't like keep track of those families and send out letters saying, why did you opt in, or like shame anybody for that. But the mentality that we went through, and this is in keeping with a lot of literature that we've read both from CSI and Christian School Management and other people that are smarter than we are, is you need to shift more to a needs-based focus for financial assistance. And so that's really where that came from as well.
I just want to take a moment to make a shameless plug for volunteering at Second Life. At the onset of Second Life, 75% of the hours worked at Second Life were worked by parents of Crown Point Christian School. Since COVID, that number's 10%, less than 10%. So here is your shameless plug to, if you're still looking for hours, we would really encourage you to utilize that to get your volunteer hours.
Trent's point was, if we're going to reallocate the use of Second Life funds, perhaps an idea would be to utilize that to decrease our borrowed loan facilities to pay down debt. And that's a great idea. That's part of our strategic roadmap that's going to be rolled out. And to piggyback on what Dave asked earlier about a foundation what? Oh, Jeff. Dave, sorry, man. Sorry, Jeff. Sorry, man. I don't know why. Oh, well, anyway. Can't work the slides, can't get names right. I'm a mess tonight. With the endowment / foundation, we also have more flexibility in the utilization of funds that come in on a charitable basis as well. With our Barnabas account, it can only be used for offerings and services provided within Crown Point Christian School. With the endowment / foundation that we're going to form, it can be spread outside of the walls of Crown Point Christian School, whether that's debt reduction or service to our community, inviting people in and hosting certain events, or helping out another nonprofit down the street. So those are the flexibilities that we want to build into this. But that is a great point, and that is something that we plan on. Joe. So the first question is, how does our compensation model tie into and compare to area non-private schools or public schools in the areas of teacher experience, credentials, level of education? Perfect. Right. David has volunteered to answer that, but you can talk about your lanes and everything like that. It would be great.
So the model that so if you look at Lake Central and Crown Point, in their master contracts, they do not have a schedule. But if you would go, I don't know if you can find the newest one, but Hanover has a model that has steps, which are often correspond to years, and lane changes. What I will tell you is Hanover's has several more years on it, right? Probably 10 more years on it than us, but it has a very similar lanes. So our lanes are BA 15 master's credits, BA 30 master's 15, master's 30. So we're similar there. They go quite a bit lower, which gets them into, the 77, 70, some 80,000. I know Crown Point, I believe their teachers, their high teacher is 94,000. So, and then in regards to, I don't know, I'm not familiar with the pension plan for Indiana public schools. I presume they have a pension similar to the states I've been in, and I'll let you answer that question then. In regards to our health insurance, our teachers out of pocket, if you have a family health insurance plan at Crown Point Christian School, your monthly out of pocket is just under $1,500 a month. We pay a maximum of $725 a month for health insurance for our teachers. We pay 75% of the cost, but it maxes out at $725. A family plan runs $2,300 or $2,200 and change. So if you want a family plan at Crown Point Christian, it's just under $1,500 a month. So it pales in comparison to our public school health insurance plans. Most of them are covering anywhere from 95 to 75. The least is 75%. So,
but as far as Go ahead, Joe. But as far as the offerings within that health insurance plan, it's a really great plan in my opinion, and it covers a lot. So they pay for it, but they get really good coverage. The IMPERF is the public schools style of an IRA or a retirement fund. That's Indiana Public Employee Retirement Fund. I only know this because my wife is an IMPERF participant. And it's a similar style of matching that we have here at Crown Point Christian School. We have a third party that administers our plan, our retirement plan, and it's very comparable to what IMPERF has as well. Yeah, so the question is, what thought and consideration was given to the families that are impacted most heavily by the budget that we're talking about for the 22-23 school year? And I would add to that, salt in the wound is also a fourth child, right? Yep. Yeah. So, also with the discounts that were given and the perks that were given, those are also being taken away. Did we consider and think about, or what consideration was given to that impact? And I will tell you, a lot of consideration was given toward that impact. We have board members in the room that are directly impacted by what we're talking about. These are difficult decisions for us to make at the board level. This again was started in September, so the process has been ongoing since September, and it's been a lot to get through, a lot to grapple with, a lot of questions, a lot of considerations, a lot of discussion, a lot of discourse. And one of the ways that we are attempting to get us to the highest point possible with Crown Point Christian School, it gets back to the affordability versus accessibility structure that we're striving toward. During our last presentation, David went through different categories of private school. Do we want to be the affordable school? Do we want to be a school of academic excellence? Do we want to be on the upper echelon academy-style private school? And it's hard to get into those lanes and be both or all to everyone. And so the decision was made to move away from the affordability aspect more toward the accessibility aspect. And the way that we are trying to soften that blow is to have the FACTS program available for families that are just outside of that. And we will provide that financial assistance where it can be demonstrated that there's a need for that assistance. So I'm going to just take a small snippet of that and say it seems like a lot at once, right? So I'm just going to take that part and I'm going to address that part. And if you want to add flavor to it, Joe, if you want to add flavor to it, you can. We agree it is a lot all at once. We're not trying to hide that fact. It is a lot all at once. And that's been a narrative for quite some time, since September, since we started working on the budgetary numbers. Is this where we want to go? Is this the all at once mentality that we want to carry through? And the struggle that we had was when we work out the models, when we look at the numbers, and we look at comparisons of where we are, where we want to be, where other area schools are, how we need to stay competitive in the marketplace with public schools and getting the best and most talented teachers that we can. The longer we take to fill that gap, the wider the gap becomes. So we could either come here and say we're going to do 4.5 this year, 5.5 next year, 4.5 the year after, 7 the next year. We could do that. But the gap is going to continue to widen the longer that it takes to get us there. And so what we're doing is constricting the amount of time that it takes us to fill that gap. Instead of taking it over the course of several years, we're doing it all in the course of 1 year. And that's a difficult decision. And it is all at once. And there are families in the boardroom that are directly, I'm one of them. I'm directly impacted by this budget. But it is the right decision for Crown Point Christian School. It is the right direction for Crown Point Christian School at this particular time. And I don't recall the specifics of last year's meeting, but if the comment was made, we're not going to have it again. The only the only argument I have against that is we did not envision a 7.5 to 8% inflationary percentage for this year, and that was a big issue that we had in all of the discussions. Because of that economic impact from the pandemic, supply chain, I mean, you name it, everything else, there was a catapult event of costs and expenditures. Everything has a higher cost now, and to make up for it, comp went up. And if comp goes up in the area, our comp has to stay similar, or at least competitive, with the other industry competitors, other area schools, so we can get the most talented teachers and faculty and staff and senior leadership possible. And if we don't do that all at once, the gap will continue to widen, and we're going to be stuck behind the 8 ball for a very long time. That's how I can explain that.
I know how frustrating it is for you and me to talk about needs-based assistance, but one of the things I want to go back to is the slide when we looked at facts. So here are the expense algorithm, and what I'm working with Joe on. We're having conversations with facts right now, and we're trying to move some of these things over to core. So there's core expenses, and then there's what did they call them? Discretionary expenses. We are moving some of these over to core so that they become more addressed, but we want the funds that we have to go to the families who need it. When you're distributing, just everybody gets the same amount, or everybody gets these discounts, they miss the target for that accessibility piece. And I began with that last 3 weeks ago because it was a conversation that happened very early in the process. And it was, do we want to step this in, or do we need to move at a faster rate because of changes in the market? And the decision was to move faster than normal because of the changes in the market, understanding the challenges associated with that.
So next year it's going to be about a 12%. I'm just kidding. So we have. I don't mean to make light of the subject matter. I know it's serious. The preliminary numbers that we have run, we are looking at anywhere between a 3 to 4.5% tuition increase year over year, and they're not going to be the same because the expenditures are variable. Some are fixed and some are not. Don't hold me to that, but those are just preliminary numbers. Better planning leads to more predictability, and that's what I think you all deserve, is a little more predictability when it comes to rolling out budgets. Did I say something bad? Well, but that's reality, and they're preliminary models, and because this room is filled with grace, they're not going to hold me to that. But I'm not going to say that that's the range that we're going to stay in. Okay, so you're chomping at the bit, man. I mean, listen, I'm a parent of students at the school, and there are tuition and expenses, other expenses that I incur on an everyday basis, and I'm one of you as a parent. But when I'm a board member, I'm no longer a parent. I'm a fiduciary for the school, and I need to make decisions. We as a board need to make decisions for what's in the best interest of the school. If it was a personal decision, it doesn't matter what I think personally. What matters is what's best for Crown Point Christian School, and I can assure you 1,000 times over that so many models, so many numbers, so many discussions were had on whether or not this was what's right for Crown Point Christian School at this moment, at this time. And the overwhelming conclusion was, yes, this is what needs to happen at this particular time. And along with that comes strategic planning, creating a roadmap, rolling it out to our association so that there is that predictability, so that there is that transparency, so that everyone can see this is where we are. These are the buckets in which we are dumping our resources. Again, 80 cents of every dollar of this tuition increase is going directly back to the people that teach your children on a day-to-day basis, right? So it's not like we're taking it and putting it somewhere for us. But I will say that we are working very hard toward the ideas of transparency and predictability. And that's something that's going to be rolled out very soon, and I'm excited about it, and I think you guys will all be excited about it too.
So the strategic roadmap process, again, I talked about two resources. There's the resource of time, so you can't do everything in 1 year. You have to like spread things out over 5 years. So there's a slide. We have all of these are the areas of focus, the strategy, and then these are the strategies we're going to implement. And then we go through and look at the cost to implement each one of those things. And then you start looking at, okay, how much are we going to raise? How much are we going to raise salaries to get to that 90% of what our public schools are within 5 years? How much do we have to plan to raise health insurance? What's our fixed cost increases going to be? And then you have to predict enrollment, right? So you got to go back because that's a big driver of income. So you predict enrollment. So last week, Christy Ruffin and I got a first draft, which I'm questioning whether I should have shared with Mr. John Ryan. But anyway, we shared it with John Ryan. It hasn't gone to the board yet. But this year does normalize those increases for the next 5. And it was exciting to get to the end and see where those numbers were at, knowing we can accomplish all the things we set out to accomplish in our 5-year strategic roadmap with reasonable tuition increases for the next 5 years, having made a pretty significant market correction this year. So yeah, I'm excited to share it with the board soon, and once it's approved by the board, and any adjustments need to be made to it, it'll come to you. And from that point, if we're like, oh man, we got to pivot after a year or two, we got to pull and replace. You can't just add, you got to pull and replace. What are we going to stop doing? If we have to start doing this, what are we going to stop doing? So it's an accountability tool for the administrative leadership team, and it helps the board make sure we're setting priorities. So it's been an exciting process, and I'm excited to have a working draft of it, and I'm hoping soon that we can have an association meeting where we roll out the strategic roadmap to you with all of the components.
So the question, I'll repeat the question, then you can respond if you'd like. The question is, with the affordability versus accessibility model, it feels like we are taking perks away from current families and redistributing those to families in need. So instead of maintaining the status quo and increasing our attention on needs-based assistance, what we are doing is taking away discounts and perks to families currently, and then instead of letting them enjoy those perks, we are taking those away and paying them to someone else, right? And in essence, I mean, I can start responding to that. You're right. That's pretty much what the accessibility model entails, is we are looking at assistance financially to only those families that can demonstrate a need for that assistance. And the reason that the accessibility model is important for Crown Point Christian School is because it allows us more flexibility that was mentioned earlier on what to do with those funds. And if a family can afford to pay full tuition, the family should pay full tuition. So I certainly empathize with what you just said, because that's a valid feeling, and you're right to have that feeling. But what I can tell you is the right model to take with the accessibility structure that we're putting in place is, if a family can pay the full tuition, the family should pay the full tuition and should adjust their home finances accordingly. And again, I wear a parent hat and I wear a board member hat. That's how I can empathize with your feeling, okay? But from a board perspective, from a senior leadership perspective, the right way to go is the accessibility model, having full tuition paid by those families that can afford it, making available financial assistance for those families that can demonstrate a need for that assistance. Anything you want to add to that?
So those discounts have not showed up in the budget as expenses. Those discounts that are given to all families are expenses, right? It's an expense to the school, and it amounts to about $500,000, right? So that conversation way back in September with the board was, guys, this is a big deal. Do we want to step this in or do we want to go? And they made the decision to move ahead with it because it's because we felt it would be a burden to step that in over a long period of time. So Cardis has just finished up a study on school sustainability and innovation. That study is going to be released. A part of that study is going to be released in June, and then they're going to write a book on sustainability and innovation. They picked 12 schools in the United States that are thriving and that have sustainable models. And in that research, a big reason that those schools are thriving is because they transitioned from being an affordable school to an accessible school. Now, I can't tell you what the research says on whether they just yanked the Band-Aid off like we did. And I got to hear some preliminary findings of that. But if a school wants to sustain excellence, one of the steps it has to take is to move towards an accessibility model. And I'm going to stand here like John and say you're right. And it was a big conversation because that was going to impact what this year's budget would be. Because that's $500,000. That's about a 9% tuition increase in order to maintain all of those tuition discounts. Plus, we don't get, and this was not necessarily a part of the decision, but it's a piece of it. Next year, if we offer 4th child and 5th child free, that's $175,000 we don't get in the voucher. We don't get that money because our tuition policies follow the voucher. Does that make sense? So that's the reality. We're looking at probably a 10 to 13% increase in tuition in order to keep those perks. So.
Yeah, so I'm going to rephrase that comment a little bit in understanding the idea of redistribution, which I would agree with you that's not the term that I would use for what we're doing and taking away perks and discounts, et cetera. And whether we are and how those funds are being allocated, because it's not only to needs-based assistance, but it's also to line items within the budget for teacher compensation, professional development, retention, hiring, et cetera. Joe, you wanted to make a comment on that?
I'm the one last year that said the thing about we got the tuition. Didn't mean to convey that, but I'll be a little defensive. But in any event, so last year we were talking about how the board had been working for a few years to build our administrative staff to where it needed to be, and it really needed to happen. So we've got principals and things like that. And, we did arrive at bringing up the part-time administrators to full-time administrators last year. And I think I even made a comment last year. Now, what I was wrong about was the reason that we were going to need to pay attention to teacher salaries moving forward. The CSI pension was frozen a few years ago. That was a really big deal. The amount of money that goes into the 401k is similar, but the benefits that the pension was paying out were far greater. It probably the reason it's now frozen, but in any event, so there was a big change there that occurred. About teachers, the answer to the question is, I don't think we've got a big problem, but we never ever want to get there. The truth of the matter is we did fall a bit behind, and some of that came from inflation, and some of that came from these adjustments from the pension and things like that. And to be perfectly frank, David really helped us see that. So we were a bit behind, but we don't ever want to get to the point where we say, oh, we have a problem now. And so if you look at the schedule that I think he showed at the last meeting, it's still behind where you could be, and just go right down the road. So I think these changes are absolutely necessary. And
I'm going to have John answer that question. I want to make one more comment regarding teachers because this is an important. So a study was recently released from 2010 to 2018. The number of students, of high school graduates going into and graduating from teacher prep programs went down 27% from 2010 to 2018. I can tell you from 2018 to 2022, it's gotten much worse. We are about to enter a teacher shortage that hasn't been seen in many, many, many years. And Crown Point sees it, and Hanover sees it, and Lake Central sees it. That's why they're making wholesale adjustments to their teacher starting salary. And that was one of my messages to the board, that we have to be competitive, knowing that the culture here is a selling point. The fact that you can share your faith and live your faith is definitely a selling point here, and we have to stay somewhat in line. So I just wanted to mention that piece of it, because I am concerned what the next 5 years are going to bring into getting teachers. An example is we need a science teacher. Calvin, Hope, Northwestern, Dort, and Trinity have 0 science teacher grads this year. That's a yo. So we need a science teacher. I think Ileana just hired one. Highland needs a science teacher. I mean, it's a big deal. So
Middle school science? Don't call Kara. Back to Melissa's question about the voucher program. If it goes away in 2 years, would we still support those families at the same level that the voucher supports them? I would like to say yes, but we're not prepared for that. It is extremely unlikely that the voucher program would make changes such that we would not participate in that program any longer within 2 years. There are strong incentives for both sides to participate. The state saves money because there's a cost to put students through public school. There's a cost to that. And they save, about $2,100 per student. Right, so there is a strong financial incentive for the state to maintain the same requirements for participation in the voucher program. The reality of it is, someday it may happen, and we need to be prepared for the likelihood that will become the case. If our legislature becomes such that we need to implement certain learning curriculum that we disagree with, that doesn't align with our faith-based educational system here at Crown Point Christian School, we would opt out of that voucher program. And the changes that we're making now to the foundation and the endowment is going to help facilitate building a reserve fund that would enable us to provide that same level of support to those voucher families. But in 2 years, I would like to say yes, but we're not prepared for that as a board right now. We would have to lean in on donors and others from our community to provide that assistance and support. 10, 15 years from now, yes, we are going to be ready for that, and that is something that we will provide to the families if we need to opt out of that voucher program. That's a great question. What would I do now? We will be prepared 10 years from now? Well, okay. So I'm going to do the best that I can in the next 2 years to make sure that we can carry on the tradition of enabling the school to be prepared for the day that we have to withdraw from the voucher program. What happens after the next 2 years is not my problem. Well, it might be my problem, but we'll cross that bridge when I get to it. But that is a great point, and we are taking steps to prepare for that. But 2 years, that's a little aggressive. I don't think it's likely, but we wouldn't be prepared for that. So the question is, are we pushing the voucher ineligible families that are slightly above the income threshold? Are we pushing them to the outer boundaries, and are we alienating them from coming to Crown Point Christian School? Is that a proper? Okay. And the answer to that is, it takes a conversation. We need to have those conversations with those families. We need to do a better job of making sure that we communicate with our community that we are a school that is accessible. Okay, and if you have a need for financial assistance, we can provide that for you. Even if you want to come in and have a conversation that says, this is where we're struggling, these are these are the expense categories that we're experiencing. This is what we're going through as a family. Listen, Crown Point Christian School is going to always seek to maintain the efficacy of, to maintain a family. I'll just say it that way, okay? And if finances are the thing that are driving families apart, I'm a strong believer that Satan's number one enemy is a Christian family. And we don't ever want to be the school that requires a financial sacrifice that drives a wedge in a family, and that's the door through which Satan comes in and breaks apart a family, okay? So if there is a struggle within a family, it needs a conversation. You need to reach out to Crown Point Christian School. You need to reach out to David. You need to reach out to the office. If it is something that is serious, if it is something that is complicating your lifestyle, if it is something that is having an impact, a negative impact on your and your children and your spouse's relationships, that deserves a conversation. We need to have that conversation. We're open for that conversation. But to answer your question, we need to do a good job of communicating exactly what I just communicated. We're open for communication. We're open for conversations. We need to have those conversations. If you're in that position, reach out, and there is assistance available for you to the extent that we can provide it. Anyone else? 8:24. I blame you. You want to close this in prayer, or do you want me to? Okay. Let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, we are humbled by your grace and by your sovereignty and your providence over Crown Point Christian School. We thank you so much for the faculty here, for the service that they provide to our children. We thank you for their love of Jesus Christ and the exhibition that they provide to each of our students on a day-in, day-out basis. We thank you for David T. Grotenhuis and his leadership team for the work that they've put into not only this budget, but also to providing a safe and welcoming environment for the students at Crown Point Christian School. We thank you and praise you for the health that we enjoy in coming to this meeting tonight. We thank you for each person that is present, also those that watch the video later. We pray that the Holy Spirit would move in them and just grant us discernment and grace and the ability to have these difficult conversations. Again, guide us as we leave this place. May everything we do be glorifying toward your name, and help us to always grow this school only for the purpose of your kingdom. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you in April for the association.